The next exam review problem I'm going to work for you is 4A. The instructions are solve each absolute value inequality. Okay, remember in solving an absolute value, whether we're talking about an equation or an inequality, there are always two cases because when we take care of the absolute value signs, we could originally have either a negative or a positive value in there. So we have to take care of both the case where what was in there was negative and the case where what was in there was positive. The difference between an equation and an inequality is on the equation we just solve both of them and have two specific number answers. But on an inequality, I'm saying that that value has to be greater than 13, and there are lots of values that would be greater than 13. So you don't just end up with a number, you end up with an interval, a set of numbers that would work to make that a true statement. So I'm going to have not just numbers but regions as my answer, or intervals as my answer. And now, if you remember, you have both less than inequality problems and greater than inequality problems. And a greater than problem is an or problem. Okay, so we're going to work this as an or problem, and we'll discuss that a little more as we go. So I have 3x plus 5, whoops, is greater or equal to 13, or I have 3x plus 5 is less than or equal to negative 13. I had to change that to a negative, and that's sort of like saying I moved a negative across the inequality sign, because remember I had the positive situation of this or the negative situation of this. What was in here was negative. I took the negative and moved it over to this side and made it negative. And anytime you take a negative across an inequality sign, you have to change the direction of the inequality. So there are my two problems to solve now. And again, what I'm doing here is solving for x. So I subtract 5. And I have 3x is greater than or equal to 8. Divide by 3. And x is greater than or equal to 8 over 3. Okay, or for my other situation, I subtract 5. Same thing here. Cancels on this side. I have 3x is less than or equal to negative 18. Divide by 3 on both sides. And x is less than or equal to negative 6. Remember that or means my answer can be the set of all numbers that are greater than or equal to 8 or 3, or it can be the set of numbers that are less than 6. So if I wanted to graph that situation, not a very straight line, is it? Those are my two critical points, and I'm going to put those two critical points on my number line. I'm going to have negative 6 here, and I'm going to have the positive 8 over 3 here. And now this one says that it can be greater than or equal to 8 over 3. Remember that we use brackets for greater than or equal to. So it can be anything in that region, continuing on to infinity, of course. Or it can be less than or equal to negative 6. So I have a bracket opening in this direction this time, and it can be anything in that area of my number line, continuing on to infinity. It can be this area or this area, which means it can include both of them. They don't have to overlap. So if I want to write that answer in interval notation, I look at my number line from the left to the right. My starting place, since it's going on to infinity, is going to be negative infinity to negative 6. And that's going to union the rest of it here, which is inclusive. Oh, I just noticed I made a mistake there. I hope you caught it. Inclusive of 8 over 3, starting there, and moving on to infinity. Remember, parentheses next to infinity because you can never include an endpoint, and brackets next to an endpoint that is included, which takes me to my mistake, which was right there. That should have been what? That should have been a bracket because that -6 is included. Be sure not to make that mistake when you're taking your exam. Okay, so that's my interval notation for the values that x can be, and here is a graph of what x can be, and there is my inequality statements for what x can be. If I want to write those inequality statements in solution set notation, it's x such that x is less than or equal to -6, or x is greater than or equal to 8/3. I went from least to greatest and put my answer in solution set notation, inequality notation, interval notation, and my graph. And there you go.